Welcome to episode 61 of Broad Street Hustle. We're back to bring the second half of Philly sports and 40 years of futility. We got the Phillies and Eagles tonight. A little housekeeping for you. Next week, we it's the All-Star break in Major League Baseball, so we'll cover the first half of baseball. I'll probably give some updated predictions, maybe touch a little bit on our previous quarter show where we made some draft picks of teams making the playoffs, etc. When and then kicks off Saratoga season. So every week we'll usually bring the late pick four of the Saturday, which is the bigger day of Saratoga. So that'll kick off next week. Hopefully we'll have some guests throughout the Saratoga meet to help us handicap, but if not, the regular boys will be here. But let's kick it off. We are going to kick it off with the Phillies first, but let's go through who we got. As always, I'm your host Tommy Nanny. We got co-host Jason Sayeda.
Hey Tom, how are you?
Jason, how are you? We got Jimmy the Chalk.
I would say absence makes the heart grow fonder, but I already love you guys too much as it is. So it was a long 2 weeks.
Yeah, it did feel long. And we got Christopher Michael Meeker from a new venue.
Yeah, the newly renovated bedroom.
If you're watching on
Which
YouTube.
I'm supplanted at because my parents are at the condo tonight, so I had to change locations. So, had to adapt to the situation.
We're still waiting for the ocean background.
Yep, we'll get there.
The light is great,
nighttime every time we're recording, so I don't know what you're saying.
But the light is great. You never look better, so...
Meeker is our, in fantasy baseball, he's our anti-Robin Hood. He's the rob from the poor and give to the rich.
Oh, no.
Chris Meeker.
Cry, 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 cry. That's all I'm hearing is crying lately.
All right, let's kick this off. So 40 years, what are we, 24? So that gives us, what, 84 or so? So right after the Phillies went to the World Series, I guess started the downturn for the Phillies, which was not good for a while until you had the magical season in '93, and then I would say it was not good again for a long while, and then I guess '07 kind of started the little bit of a playoff run, right? Yep, and then '08 obviously, and from there we could talk, but we usually go to Jason first to kind of give us a little bit of his thoughts and kind of walk us through the Phillies in the last 40 years, and we'll play off that. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I'm going to take a step back, though, from 83. Just a quick one and say that I think the downfall actually started in 1982, and I'll tell you why. So Dallas Green was the manager of the Phillies when they won the World Series in 80. He hung around for 81, and then after that, the Cubs reached out to him. The Cubs wanted him to run the whole shebang there. So the Cubs actually stole him away. And when Dallas Green went to the Cubs, he decided he wanted a veteran shortstop to take over, in Chicago for that team. But then he also said, hey, well, you're going to trade me Larry Bowa. Why don't you throw in that Ryan Sandberg into the trade for us? We'll give you Ivan De Jesus. Just throw Ryan Sandberg in as a throw-in. Well, they did, because they didn't think Ryan Sandberg could play. They didn't think he was athletic enough to play shortstop because that was his position, and he just turned into a Hall of Fame second baseman. But anyway, so I think that was a major hit for the Phillies in the '80s. '83 Phillies, they were the Wheeze kids, they called them. Got all these older guys that come and it came in, and your Joe Morgans and your Tony Perez and Pete Rose and Gary Matthews, and they rode to the World Series and ran into the Orioles and lost there. But then, that was a one-time thing. They were done after that. Signed Lance Parrish in 1980. Well, let me go to 84, 85. They were mediocre. 86, they're actually a pretty good team, but they ran into the Mets, who were a great team and won the World Series. 87, they decided to sign Lance Parrish because they had Darren Dalton. And he wasn't developing the way they thought he would. So signed Lance Parrish. He was one of the biggest free agent busts in Philadelphia sports history. Schmidt was declining. He retired in '89, and once he retired, that just started the disastrous stretch for the Phillies. Pretty much from '88 through 2000. Now, of course, they had that '93 team, which was a flash in the pan, lightning in a bottle, whatever you want to call it. It was one of the greatest and most fun seasons and fun teams that there was in Philadelphia.
That was
sports
probably
history.
my favorite Philadelphia team of any sport
Yeah.
of all time. That
Yeah,
season.
I think mine was the '87 Flyers, but the '93 Phillies were pretty close.
Yeah, I mean that was one of those that was like fun in the moment, fun
Yeah.
when you look back at it. When you watch old videos of it,
Yeah,
it's still never.
and
it's
just
still-
it's just total random. Like they weren't good in '92.
They were picked last
Yeah.
to finish in the division that year,
Yeah, and they were
and
just
then the
like,
guys, and we'll get into that season. I'm sure the guys that they had was just which we'll get into. Good, keep going.
No, that's a good point. I mean, Lee Thomas put together a team of just ragtag guys that just.
I
all
mean,
fit,
think
you know?
of like you look at Pete Incaviglia. It was like a nobody, beer drinking slugger.
Just-
Their right fielder. I mean, not to make light of the situation, but was legitimately had Tourette's and would scream curses at the infielders as the game's going on.
He was a pure hitter, though, man. The guy could hit. He was a good hitter, Jim Eisner.
And then it was every guy had a moment that season.
Yep.
Kim Baptiste has his moment. Mario Duncan had the Mother's Day Grand Slam.
Grand Slam.
Dalton Dykstra obviously had theirs. Kruk had that was the All-Star game, right, where Randy Johnson, pitches to Kruk. It was that moment. Incaviglia had his moment. Mitch Williams.
Dykstra was one of the best leadoff hitters of all time
Yeah.
that season. I mean,
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Mitch he's an incredible closer, but he gets a hit in the 20th inning or whatever it was, and that in the double header that was like 9
Started
hours.
at like 2:00 in the morning, the second game or whatever.
Todd Pratt might have even had a game where he had 2 home runs. Was that season as well?
Against the Mets.
Right?
That was
Pratt
against
was
the
a
Mets.
good backup catcher.
I mean,
yeah.
it's like every single guy you could pinpoint.
Yeah.
They had, I think their 5-man rotation. They all had 10 wins or more, if I'm not mistaken. It's
They
just
were
incredible.
just and then you had Schilling was
And
was
then,
an
yeah.
ace. I mean, he was lights out. But yeah, and like I said, that was a flash in the pan. It was a 1-year thing, and then after that, I mean, pretty much like I said, from the mid '80s to 2000 was just a bleak time for the Phillies organization. One of the main things that hurt them again was J.D. Drew in '97. I'll go through their draft picks at some point. I'm not going to hog up this whole segment, and I'll let everyone else get their things in. But I want you guys to come back to me, and I'm gonna run off their draft picks, especially in the 80s and 90s, and you'll kind of see why they had that period that was so bleak. But I'll leave it there and let you guys continue.
Yeah, I mean most of the teams, it's drafting that is usually the downfall of why teams start to struggle. I mean, if we just look at Philadelphia, we talked about the Sixers 2 weeks ago. Clearly, that was the Ben Simmons and the Markel Fultz kind of destroyed that franchise.
Basically,
more
it's all
recently.
3 teams that we've talked about so far. Is drafting is what went bad.
And the Eagles, who we'll cover, also had runs of just like
And I'll give you
guys that
those.
weren't even on the playing field.
I'm going to give you a period of their draft picks that you're going to say,
definitely
holy shit.
drafting is a thing. Baseball's a little weird too. It's because it was back then. Now it's more so little teams made the playoffs too. So it was when things are bad in baseball, they're real bad because it's not like you're hockey and you're the 8th seed. You finally made a playoffs or 2. It's like Phillies had stretches 10 years with playoff droughts because more than that.
And they had a couple of decent, like I said, that '86 team had a pretty decent record, but like you said, only 4 teams made the playoffs.
Right,
back
so
then,
it felt even more futile, as they say.
Yep.
How about you, Chalky? Any ads, kind of as the overall history?
Yeah, I mean baseball I guess was the first sport that I really remember getting into as a kid, spending a lot of nights in the summer either with my dad or with my grandfather watching watching the games, and unfortunately, my first memories overall are probably '86, but '87 was the first year I got to go to games, and that was when they really started going in the tank. And at that age, I knew they weren't good, but it wasn't really kind of dawning on me how bad they were until like probably the early, I would say like 90, 91. I was like, okay, these after Schmidt had retired, and those were like 2 years in the middle that were just really, really rough even as a kid. And then 92, their record overall wasn't that great. I think Dykstra got hurt very early in that season. But while I won't go as far as to say I predicted the 93 Phillies, that 92 team actually showed some signs of life, because I think that's the year Dalton led the league in RBIs. Schilling, they just traded for. He wasn't the ace yet, but he showed some potential there. And I think Kruk was right near the top of the league most of the year in the batting average race. So they lost a lot of games, and Hollins was starting to come on a little bit. So it was a fun team of sorts. And then, like, 93 took it to the next level. And like Tommy, that's probably my favorite Philadelphia sports team of all time, just because it was the first really. I was still a little young when the Flyers went in '87, so, and growing up, my dad wasn't a big Flyers fan, so we didn't watch a lot of Flyers games. So baseball was always that first sport, and then the Eagles, and that was just such a great year because of everything we mentioned. And you talk about the way the team was constructed. It was really like a team you haven't seen before or since, whereas you had some guys that had good years before, but their previous teams had gotten tired of them, so they got picked up in trades. Like Kruk had been an all-star with San Diego and played the outfield at the time because he was about 50 pounds lighter. Dykstra was obviously a good player, but wore out his welcome in New York. They traded Juan Samuel for him. Danny Jackson had a couple productive years with Cincinnati, but then he went in the tank. He came over here. Mentioned Duncan. Milt Thompson was back for his second run with the Phillies.
They had started the season, spring training with Dale Murphy on the roster.
Right. Dale Murphy got cut right before the season started and ended up not really playing more and just missed 400 home runs in the Hall of Fame at this point. And
Quick trivia question. Do you guys know who the Phillies traded for to get John Kruk?
Chris James.
Yep. You got it.
And I believe they got Randy Reddy back in that deal as well.
They also did. That is correct. And do you know Chris James' brother, what he did?
Rick
Played
James
for the Patriots.
He was
Craig
running
James.
back.
Did he write?
Yep,
Oh,
and
Craig
he
James
was
for
also-
SMU.
With SMU, with
Pony Express.
Dickerson.
And he played with Eric Dickerson and SMU. That's
Yep.
So
correct.
it was not Super Freak. Got it.
No, not the Super Freak.
No.
And then you had young guys like Schilling that were kind of on their way up, and then Stocker came up. Remember, Juan Bell was the starting shortstop that year. Stocker came up. And then you had guys that never had a year like that again, and Tommy Green, who got hurt that year, and he was never the same. And it was really the perfect team together because it was the end of the Pirates dynasty. So that team was no longer that good. And it was a year or whatever before the realignment to where Atlanta then came in the East. So it was really a year that the East was wide open. There was no wild card yet, and it's about as magical as you could get for the formula.
The Cardinals were still in the East, I believe.
Cardinals were
right?
still in the
Weren't
East, and they ended up finishing second, I believe. Or no, our Expos might have actually, because they were just starting to get really good, and they were in first place the next year, the strike year, before they broke them up.
Yeah, they were really good that year. The '94 Expos were
Yeah, they would have won the. They would have won
that
the World
probably
Series
is a
if
World
they would've
Series
finished
winning
that
team.
season.
But when you consider that's the only winning record they had as a team between that '86 team and the 2001 team, it really was lightning in the bottle, where everybody had a career year or about as good as they could play at the same time, and they lucked into a setup in the division that got them into the playoffs, and then. They beat the two-time defending national champions with arguably their best team to that point, 3 Hall of Fame pitchers in the rotation, whatever it was that year. And it's a shame they didn't end up winning it. But that was be great memories. But before and after, drafting stunk, and the free agent signings weren't anything. And it wasn't until the early 2000s when Ed Wade's draft started, coming to fruition. Some of the guys they took that the team became desirable. They got the free agents. We won't get into all that right now, but it was that's as rough as a patch for any of the teams as a fan from the '87 to not 2001 that the Phillies team was.
And quickly before I go to Meeker, it was like a culmination of the. They also played in the worst stadium in baseball, so it was It's like now they stunk, recently when they stunk, you had Citizens Bank Park, you go to the game, it's still
Yeah.
an experience. I mean, that was like, yeah, there was what, 5,000-6,000 people at games, and there was no reason to go to a game.
The 92 season, when they were the worst in the division or whatever, like, I was probably there once a week because it was the library was giving out tickets, or people in work were giving my dad tickets, and it was great as a kid. By like 3 years later, it was like, I'm not. If the team stinks, I'm not going out there. Like, 93 kind of spoiled me in that way. But it's it's not the same atmosphere for sure as
it was a culmination. How about you, Maker?
Yeah, I mean, look, they didn't draft well. They really neglected the farm system, for a long time there. And I know Jason's going to probably rattle off some of the names that I remember them drafting. But the other thing that I thought, and I think you guys will remember this. I know Jason will. Do you remember what Bill Giles called Philadelphia at one point in time?
I don't remember.
He called it.
I remember that he wasn't.
I want to say
he called it a small market team.
Yeah.
Did he? Yeah. He wasn't well liked. I remember.
And the big problem with that was, first of all, they're not a small market team and never were a small market team. They're like the 6th or 7th biggest market in all of baseball. But it was like that loser mentality for those many years you're talking about here, from the mid 90s through the like late 80s to like the mid 90s, other than 93, of course, but they acted like a small market team in that they didn't go after any big name free agents, and the ones that they did sign, like the Greg Jeffries of the world, didn't turn out to be anything. And realistically, when you don't have a farm system in baseball, and you look at the Atlanta Braves as a perfect example of a team that does it right, you're going to have years like that, because you're not replenishing the guys that are getting older, the Schmitz of the world that were getting older. Roland didn't come for how many years?
You didn't like Rick Shue?
Yeah.
You didn't like Rick
Roland
Shue?
didn't come for how many years after Schmidt retired?
Didn't they also neglect like the Latin American players, or like
there was
over
for
in
a
Latin
long
America
time
for a long time?
For a long time they weren't, didn't even have scouts in some of these places, So look, I mean, it took, what Tommy said, it took them to get out of a stadium and into another stadium for the fans to start coming back, and it was the right place, the right time for that, because literally, they were losing, and I'm looking at attendances from 1995 to 2002. They didn't break 2 million, not one time in that whole span. They were losing the town. Citizens Bank Park actually brought the fans back into the fold for the Phillies, because it was rough. I mean, it was rough to be a fan of any team in Philadelphia during those times. I mean, sporadically you had the Flyers making a cup, and the Eagles had a couple years there that were okay. But yeah, I mean, it was tough being a Phillies fan. And then you have like Terry Francona, who has 4 god awful years as a manager here, and then somehow goes to Boston and wins a few World Series. So it's like when these guys
he
leave.
had talent in Boston.
Of course he had talent.
He didn't have
I mean,
talent.
But that's my
baseball
point.
managers need talent.
It does matter, but my point is, like, right, he wasn't a bad manager. They were god awful because their talent was god awful, and they just weren't doing anything about it because Bill Giles wanted to tell us that they were a small market team.
Yeah, well, a common theme in was last 2 weeks ago show and this show you'll hear is, a lot of why these teams have been so poor is the ownership was poor for long periods. When the ownership, the weak years of the Eagles were poor ownership. It wasn't until what's his face, the guy now, comes along and takes the Eagles that they started to kind of come into the Lurie, right? And now every year they're that kind of team.
And that's,
the years we talked about Snyder, the importance of when Snyder left and came back and took over the team.
And it's not a coincidence, I'm sure, because Meeker said it without explicitly saying it. So Carpenters divested their ownership around 81, 82, I think, which is when Giles and the conglomerate, and he was the lead of that. And then Paul Owens, I think, retired after 83. So those are the guys that owned and built that decade of success. They left, and then the people that followed up, they weren't willing to spend, they weren't willing to do this, and they made poor personnel choices along the way. So really, it helped fall off a cliff because the guys that built the team to that position were no longer there anymore after 83.
And then 08, who was that was still the whole group of people that owned it. That Middleton wasn't around just yet, right? That wasn't until
No.
He was at the
He was a
part of
the
that
ownership.
ownership,
He just
but they
wasn't
didn't-
majority.
Montgomery was like
Montgomery
the
was
lead
really like
decision
the-
maker
Yeah,
at that point.
he was
but,
the guy.
I just lost the thing I had up. Who the president was? Yeah. So Montgomery. So Giles was president until '97. Then Montgomery took over from '97 to 2014. But as it got further along the line, closer to and then the success, like Middleton started slowly buying up more and more of the team and had a larger voice in the transactions in the late 2000s.
Look, baseball is a game where teams have their runs, and obviously we've seen that with the Phils, from 07 to 11 or 12. But, they did, I'm not making excuses, but, Atlanta in the 90s, the Mets in the late 80s. You were talking about the Pirates, when the Bonds era Pirates. There were really good teams in their division, and if you don't win the division at these times that Tommy talked about, you're not making the playoffs. But they weren't competitive for a good, solid 7 to 10 years there. And that's pretty sad, but I think it had everything to do with ownership. And, like I said, it took a new stadium and new ownership to come in to change the whole dynamic of the team, which I'm sure that you're about to talk about now, Jason.
Well, I was going to say, yeah. I mean, I was going to say the scouting system to me is, and that's part. The ownership's got to spend money and get
so
a
much
scouting
of scout
system.
right
in.
is the money invested in the scouting department.
When I read these names, whenever you guys are ready, you're going to say, well, that's the reason why they went 15 years of being like just an awful organization. Like you can't even imagine
Yeah, go for it.
these drafts. All right,
ready.
I'm going to start in 1988. So they had the 11th pick. They took Pat Combs. Nothing special there,
Oh.
right? 89, this is a big one. They had the 4th pick. They took Jeff Jackson, and then right after Jeff Jackson went Frank Thomas.
Yep.
Okay. 1990, Lieberthal. Okay, not a bad pick. He was the third pick in the draft. 91, 10th pick, Tyler Green. Couple picks later, Manny Ramirez. 92, Chad McConnell with the 13th pick. Ever heard of him?
Never.
Okay. 93, they had the 4th pick in the draft. Wayne Gomes. They took. All right. 94, 23rd pick, Carlton Lower. Another guy that did nothing. 95, Roger Taylor with the 14th pick. A couple picks later was Roy Halladay. 96, the 11th pick, Adam Eaton. Now that first round, if you look
You
at
got a
that
ring.
first round, was bad. But then they got Jimmy Rollins in the second round. So
Well, and baseball, it's not just about the first round. So many players come from the
Right.
later rounds too.
yeah. Then 97, they had the 2nd pick in the draft. J.D. Drew basically told them, I am not playing for the Phillies, and they still drafted him. And you see how that worked out. So, but then it started to turn around. 98, they had Burrell with the 1st pick. I mean, he was good. He wasn't great. He wasn't a bust, but, 1st pick. I don't know if he gave you 1st pick production. But then, it got better. 99, the 12th pick was Myers, a good pick. Of course, Utley in 2000. Gavin Floyd was the 4th pick in 01. I mean, that's not great. Mark Teixeira went right after him. But then you had Hamels, 02. 03, they didn't have a pick. So, basically, after Hamels, it just started to go down, that team won a World Series, but then it's just Greg Golson in 04. In 05, they didn't have a
And that
pick.
was what happened is as guys got old, they had nothing to replenish.
Right. 'cause
And in
now
08,
I'm
that
reading
08
these
team, they
names.
held on to those players probably a year too long.
And that's
So then
and that's
when they
another, yeah.
they tried to move them, they got nothing for them, and they had nothing coming up the system, and that's why you
No,
had
well, that's what
years.
they traded for guys. They traded for Lee, Halladay, Oswald.
Yeah, they went for it. I can't
Pence.
really fault them for it.
Right.
And
No,
it wasn't-
but the writing was on the wall, and they're
Oh,
still
yeah, no.
wheeling out.
They waited too
I
long.
think
They waited
and
too
Howard-
They
long.
held on to the
Howard-
World Series team too long. They gave Howard a horrific contract earlier than they had to. Did not have to give Howard that contract when they did. I'll go a step further. I think I debated Meeker about this before. I thought they made a big mistake in 2011 with the 4 aces. Like, adding Cliff Lee to that rotation was overkill because you neglected the lineup. You needed an outfielder or you needed a third baseman in that lineup because they stopped hitting after 2010, that team. Did you really need 4 aces? Like, I don't know. I think that was a mistake. Anyway, I'll end with, signing Harper was obviously very significant just for the fact that people wanted to come here after that. So I think they're in good shape now, but it's very, very evident to me why they just fell off a cliff. Basically, for that 15-year period in the late 80s and up till 2000, and then after the World Series teams.
Well, Tommy was saying, like, baseball is different from football or basketball in that, you get guys in later rounds that end up being, starters on your team, but you just named, between Utley and Rollins and Hamels, the reason why they won a World Series.
Yeah,
So you can't continue to miss constantly for that long in the first round and be
Right,
competitive.
those guys, when you can get guys in the later rounds, it's just added. It's just like icing on the cake if you're drafting, even if you're hitting at 25% of your first round picks, 30% of your first round picks, they hit a like 0% of their first round picks. I mean, where teams are getting like generational players in the first round, like organizational type players, and they got nothing
for a 10-year period.
For a
Their
10-year. That's hard to do.
Just atrocious.
And they came around with what you said earlier. They came around with scouting out the islands, and bringing in some of the Latino players, some of which, were on the team we're talking about. So, yeah, I mean, it's this management for a good 20-plus years of our youth.
The
Phillies,
the Phillies still don't have, though, those Latin players
Not
that
much.
other teams
Not
have.
right
I mean, you go through the
No,
Phillies lineup, Phillies, and it's like their pitching staff, I guess, is a little more, but their lineup isn't. I mean, it's just a lot of white dudes, to be honest with you. I'm watching that Rays team. I mean, every guy, it's like he's from this part of Latin America, that part of Latin America. The Reds brought up a freak from Latin America.
Look at the Dodgers. Like, they must have
the Dodgers.
the greatest, scouting system. They have rookie of the year after rookie of the year, and it's been going on for 30 years, 40 years since me and Meeker start. Steve Sachs and all those guys in the early 80s. I'll tell you another team. When the Montreal Expos dispersed, somebody should have went and paid whoever they had scouting to come to run the scouting system of their organization.
Guerrero,
Because
Pedro.
there was another team that drafted well. Yeah. I mean, that, like we said, that 94 team, they probably waltz into a World Series if there wasn't a strike that year. And they all dispersed when they moved.
Well, it was a lot sooner than that. They moved till 05, and by 96, 97, they got rid of Martinez.
They just
Walker,
had to start trading
Alou.
those guys because they
didn't want to spend.
They
didn't get attendance.
Couldn't afford them.
And they weren't making money up there, and the exchange rate was terrible. Whatever excuse they're using, but I mean, and Atlanta, the other team in Atlanta had a little bit of downtime, but going back from when they got good back in the early 90s and through today, like, they're just always bringing prospects up, like, and guys that can, and they were, seemed like whenever they needed a player in the 90s, they made a trade and they got somebody in, and the Phillies were just not that. I mean, I guess in the late 2000s, the aughts, they were, and so they needed a pitcher. They went out and got Lee, and then next year they let Lee go for Holiday. Needed a pitcher, got Oswalt, and then they went out and got Hunter Pence, and I think the hitting in the end, Ibanez, yeah. So like, I think when they did let guys go from those teams, the timing. They never let a guy go too early, I think, for the most part. Because they let Burrell go, and he fell off a cliff, replaced him with Ibanez. They let Worth go. Worth got way overpaid to go to Washington to do what he did. Replaced him via trade with Pence. That wasn't quite the same, but, so there was a drop there. The four aces thing was fun. Obviously, it didn't work out. I honestly don't know what other bats might have been available to swap in unless you're going to keep Worth, and maybe he plays better here than he did in Washington, but he got paid a lot of money to not do that well down there. So
I think that team was also mismanaged, but that's another story.
No,
Oh,
Jimmy
yeah.
Williams retires, and all of a sudden, like they just fall short like a couple times, in the playoffs, or whatever. And that team crushed it for 5 of the 6 months of the regular season. They slowed down in September, and they weren't able to turn it on completely in that Cardinals series. Which hey, if Cliff Lee doesn't blow a 4-0 lead, they're still in the championship series that year, and who knows what happens. But and then Howard gets a bad contract and then tears his Achilles right in the middle of it or at the beginning of it. So I also don't think Halladay. I think by 12 Halladay was shot, and then by 13 Lee was shot. So like you spent a lot of money on these guys, and then like you got one or two really good years, and then that was it. And so those choices didn't pay dividends for more than a year or two either. When they
it's the fact that they only won that one. If they would have won that second World Series, it's a whole.
Yeah,
different,
you needed 2 World Series out of that.
Yeah, whether you win 08 or whether you win 09 or whether you win 11, if you get 2 out of that run, then you're in the dynasty conversation.
They
if
were better than the
09,
Yankees.
you don't even
They
make
should have
some
beat.
of the
They should.
mistakes.
Oh yeah, true.
They should have beat the Yankees in 09.
Yeah.
They were a better team than the Yankees.
Their
They
best team was 11. That was the best team that they had in that whole run.
I mean, win-wise, but
Talent.
I don't know. I mean, I mean, listen, we could go over the reasons why they stopped hitting in 2010, but they were not, like Tommy said, the 09 team hit, and they had pitchers.
Right.
I think the 09 team was better than the 11 team. 11 team didn't hit. 11 team had a better rotation.
The guys the Utleys and the Howards were starting to slow up.
Yeah.
In their careers, they weren't the same what they were in the other years.
The strength of the team had definitely switched. I mean, you had Pedro Martinez as your second starter in the series that year because Hamels couldn't get it together. And Pedro did well enough until Game 6 of the World Series.
I mean, 08. Who they have in 08? I mean, they had guys that pitch well, but you had Brett Myers. You had Joe Blanton. I mean,
you had guys that got hot at the right time. Myers got sent down in the middle of that year, came back up, and then pitched really well the rest of the year. But you had
Blanton that was undefeated, came to the team and was undefeated.
Yeah, you had Howard was at his best. 11, Utley missed like the first 2 months of the year with a knee injury, and he never got rolling again. So you got the 8. You had your guys hitting your best, and by 11 they were still decent numbers, enough for what they were doing, but they couldn't get back to that. And then in the end, you lose 1-0 on a first inning run that Halladay gives up in that wild card series, and you don't get a run at all in the game. And like that just spoke for. I mean,
they just couldn't hit.
Yeah.
They couldn't hit that team. That team was. Howard was terrible. There's nobody hit. That was my whole point. Like you needed a bat. And like Chalky said, I don't know who was available at third base. I don't know who was available in the outfield, but you needed one.
Did they not make a deadline move that year? Did they not add to?
Pence
was
their
Pence. Yeah, and he was a disappointment. In all honesty,
I mean, he was a guy that was going to hit you.
He hit 324.
He was okay, but he wasn't a 30 home run guy like Worth had.
Nah, he was
like you were going to get that
25
power.
home runs, 270 basically. That's what you're getting from Hunter Pence. So which is
but
fine.
He was good that year. He was good when they landed him because he hit like 320. Well, I'm looking at it, 324, 11 homers, 35 RBIs.
He hit that with the Phillies, or
that's his Phillies numbers.
With the Phillies.
Yeah. The rest of the team.
Playoffs. I don't know what his playoff.
Howard was terrible. I remember Howard stunk that year.
He had 116 RBIs.
33 home runs, which was down significantly from 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah.
He wasn't.
Playoffs.
He wasn't like crazy good like he was before that. That's when he started to drop off, Ryan Howard, that year. But he wasn't really dropping like a fly. I mean, he had a good year, a decent year for him. But
I mean, Utley hit 260, which was low for him, and he, like I said, he only had 11 home runs because he only played 100 games.
Jason's whipping boy that whole time was Rollins more than anybody else. And I understand, after his MVP year, I think he got a little power happy. He started he was, he could have been, I'll put it this way, I don't know if he'll make the Hall of Fame, but he could have been a Hall of Famer.
I think
if he doesn't make it, it would only be because he was in his own way, with that, long swing that he had when he didn't need to do that because
he thought he was Ricky Henderson. He wanted to be Ricky Henderson.
Yeah, well, he was from Oakland, and that was his idol. Yeah, that's what he wanted to be. But Um, he was, of all the players, I guess that came from that era, he was probably the best of them. Probably the best
Yeah.
player.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, he just could have been so much better. And he was just so frustrating. When he would pop up
Uh,
and not hit the ball on the ground.
And one of the things about that
He had a
last year
couple
was,
hustle issues throughout
Oh, yeah.
his,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
Um,
sure did.
The Phillies did themselves in because if they don't sweep Atlanta in the last series of the year, Cardinals are in a playoff or don't get in. And the Phillies had nothing to play for. And Atlanta choked, but the Phillies beat them, 3 or 4 games and got the Cardinals into the playoffs, so then knocked them out. So I think it was that was a crazy last night of the season because the Rays got in at the last minute and the Phillies played extra innings against Atlanta. I think that ended up knocking them out. But you lose 2 of those games, you play the Braves in the playoffs, and it's a completely different scenario than St. Louis.
I mean, look, no matter how much you're willing to spend, I mean, there's going to be times where they're going to be lean. But the good thing that came from all that, and I think it really manifested upon Citizens Bank Park being built, is that they aren't afraid to spend money now. Like, so the reasons why they weren't good in the 80s into the 90s will not be the reasons why they're not going to be good moving forward, because I think at least this ownership is willing to do whatever it takes.
Then
to win.
they signed like a mega TV contract, and
Yeah.
that kind of helped
Yeah,
them.
$1 billion.
Yeah, to spend that
with
money.
Comcast, I think,
Right.
yeah.
So that played a
Yeah.
pretty big factor in why why you see that today. And then Middleton's,
He wants to win, though.
kind of
I mean,
up
like,
front with going
Yeah,
for it. Yeah.
Middleton's the type of owner you need, like, for the Flyers, right? You need a guy that just wants to win. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just wants to win. He's trying to win.
I mean, baseball
And-
too,
and
with no
listen-
salary cap. You can.
Yeah, if you pay the tax.
Yeah, the luxury tax gets in the way. But I mean, I will say, and now they got like the double tax or like the co-ed tax or whatever they're calling it now.
Yeah, there's like an extra
so
tax
so
you
like
can
a
go
billionaire
over.
can't come in and spend that much. And I think they even limit the when they go to like Latin America for the undrafted guys. I think there's a cap on how much you can spend to sign these guys now or whatever. But I mean, look, you saw it last year and you saw it before. If the team wins, people are going to go to the games. They're going to spend a lot of money on this team, on everything. You're going to make a lot of money. I know baseball is revenue sharing, but, that's the incentive there to spend money is you're going to make it back and then some more with the way that the fan base is in the area. Like, people will come and see the games and buy your jerseys and all that stuff. And so, I mean, I don't know why the Giles era didn't get that, but I mean, I guess they made more money by not spending money, and they were cheap with the revenue sharing. But
they were cheap.
I mean-
He said it was a small market team. They were in a crap hole stadium. You can go on and on of the reasons why players didn't want to come here.
Right.
Free agents
I just-
especially.
Yeah, I think you're going to see an upturn now because they've been hitting on draft picks, right? You hit on Bone, you hit on Stott, you hit on Painter, right? I mean, hopefully he's healthy, right? Mick Abel's a good draft pick, and now you hit on this kid Crawford. This kid Crawford's going to be in the futures game already, and he's like what, 18? How old is he?
Yeah.
I think he's 18, right?
Nola's been contributing. He was a first round pick.
Of course.
Yeah, Nola was a good pick, right? So you've hit on picks now. So and you already have a nice team. So now, what you have now is you have a general manager who tries to win. So these guys, you're probably not going to see a lot of them because he's going to trade them, but he's going to get somebody. Like, I guarantee he's going to get you a pitcher at some point this year. You're going to get a starting pitcher for sure, and a first baseman probably. I heard one name today that was interesting, Bellinger.
Yeah, he's been playing
He's-
first base.
He plays first in the outfield, and he is on the last year of his contract. The Cubs are looking to rebuild.
that's a guy because if Harper ultimately does play first, you have an outfielder to replace Schwarber now. If he doesn't play first, you have a first baseman. So it's
Yeah,
It's just
and he's
flexibility.
good at both
Yeah.
positions. He's
Yeah.
a good defender. So keep an eye on him.
all right. Anything else before we move on to the Birds?
No, I think I got out everything I wanted to talk about.
All right, let's move on to the Eagles, who probably, are the number one team in Philadelphia, and probably the fan base is, pays a lot more attention to Eagles, even when they even when they stink, fans are still kind of paying attention to them. But there was some lean years for a while. I mean, I could go back to I don't even remember the years, but being at the Yaden Swim Club on Labor Day, and the game's blacked out. It's the first game of the season, and they don't sell enough tickets, so the game's blacked out. We got it on and barbecuing, but got it on the radio because you couldn't hook it up to the TV. I mean, that happened a lot, those blackout games. So there was some bad years. But Jason, you're usually good at reviving history, so take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start right in the mid '80s, right? Because after Dick Vermeil left, he burned out after the Super Bowl. It was really bleak. The Marion Campbell years were just bad. And then they hired Buddy Ryan in '86. He was just actually they hired him right as he was in the Super Bowl. Like he told his team, told the Bears defense in the locker room before the Super Bowl that he was leaving. So I brought a lot of excitement to the city. I mean, he was brash. He talked a lot of smack, and people didn't like him. I always thought he was fun. He definitely brought a great defense here. I mean, he built what I think was the greatest defense I've ever watched. It's just a shame that they couldn't win a Super Bowl. Buddy kind of. He kind of neglected the offense.
Yeah, his arrogance towards his defense being the best and his against the offense is what ultimately killed him.
Yeah, but they drafted Randall in '85 in the second round, and back then, like he was really like a novelty. Like you never saw. Drafting Randall Cunningham today was what you draft today, but back then, nobody knew what he could do. Randall, I always say Randall was just uncoachable. I know Buddy Ryan was not a great offensive coach for him, but Randall didn't want to learn. Like, Randall just wanted to run around and make plays and just be Randall Cunningham. But anyway, I'll move on. Just a shame that team never won a Super Bowl with that defense. They let Reggie White leave in '93. Jerome Brown, skipping the whole Jerome Brown thing. I mean, that was just obviously a tragedy when he died, and that kind of killed the defense a little bit. But Norman Brain was the owner. He didn't want to pay Reggie White. Let Reggie White leave. Best defensive player of all time, in my opinion. But then Brayman sold the team. Lurie started off on the wrong foot, in my opinion, by, Dick Vermeil wanted to come back. He wanted to run the team. He wanted to be the coach. He wanted to be the GM. Lurie didn't want to give him all that control or whatever Lurie wanted to do. I don't know. He just wanted to hire Ray Rhodes. He hired Ray Rhodes. Bad decision. But then he corrected it with Andy Reid in '99, and ever since then, Reid brought a great era of football. They drafted, in my opinion, the best quarterback in their history, McNabb. He always came off small and big games, but he was a pretty good quarterback. I always get into that debate of Randall versus McNabb. I don't think it's close to me. I think
no way.
Yeah. McNabb's a better quarterback than Randall Cunningham. Then a lot of things fell away in '17, obviously. Won the Super Bowl. Now built the team back up to be a perennial contender. So, we can't really complain about the last 25 years or so of Eagles football. My whole thing is, can Hurts maintain his level of play from last year? I guess we'll see. But it's probably, like Tommy said, it's probably the best organization of the four in the city in the last 40 years.
Yeah,
they had awful drafts too, so I want you to come back.
Yeah,
to get these guys. I'm going to run through their drafts, but
that was probably their biggest downfall.
Yeah, I got some names for you.
But no, the Eagles are like we've gone through and talked about the poor way that organizations are run. I mean, the Eagles are run well, regardless of even if they have bad years. Like since Lurie, that's just a well-run organization. Mm-hmm. What they do in the community is different than the other organizations. It's just everything about their culture that kind of does help them be successful. But they had those Kotite years were pretty bad. I mean, Ray Rhodes had a little bit of success, I guess, early, right? When he first didn't he go to the playoffs his first season.
First year, he was.
Yeah.
I think he was coach of the year the first
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
And then that was the Ricky Waters team.
And then they were not too good.
Quarterback.
It went downhill really fast.
Yeah, it
But
wasn't
that was
until
a
they
lot of
got
drafts.
it wasn't until they got McNabb, the right quarterback.
Well, once
that
you
they-
come back to me, I'm gonna redraft names, and you're gonna see why it went downhill. But I want let these guys go.
Yeah, go ahead, Chalky.
I mean, Jason alluded to it, sort of what he was saying, but I mean, the most success the Eagles have had is when you've had the best coaches, and I mean, it's logical, but let's face it, like Andy Reid is a Hall of Fame coach. He might not have been a Hall of Fame coach by the time he left the Eagles, but he was pretty darn good and winning a couple Super Bowls with the best quarterback in the league. Will put you in the Hall of Fame for sure. But I love Buddy Ryan as much as anybody. He was the coach when I first started watching Eagles, and he signed an autograph for me at practice when I was like 7 or 8. So always have a soft spot for him. But I think he's deified a little too much with some people because of the players that were here, but the narrative of him being a great overall coach, I don't think people think that much anymore. But the defense didn't get at its best until the year after he left, when Bud Carson made him number. Bud Carson took those guys and put them in better spots, and I don't know that anybody could have coached them to the Super Bowl that year with Randall getting hurt. Although McMahon went 8-3 that year when he started, and Randall was 1-0. So the only game they won without either Randall or McMahon started was the last game of the year against Washington when they weren't playing their starters. So
I think McMahon was a better quarterback than Randall for that team.
I mean, maybe
just couldn't stay healthy.
He would have been, like I said, he only played 11 games, so and they lost every other game he didn't start except for the last one. So that they only missed the playoffs, I think, by one game that year. That was when Dallas started getting good, and they beat them towards the end of the year and snuck in. But that so Buddy was maybe the right coach for the time. When Buddy got fired, the two choices were Rich Kotite or Jeff Fisher. Well, they went with Rich Kotite, and that was probably not the right move. And maybe Bud Carson doesn't come if they hire Fisher, but Fisher certainly ended up being a better NFL head coach than Kotite did.
Yep.
And then you go to Ray Rhodes, who they really, they passed on Vermeil. They were trying to get Jimmy Johnson to come out of retirement. He said no. And then they wanted Dennis Erickson, but he took the Seattle job. So they got a little bit lucky with Rhodes there. And then the last, Reed, obviously great. Kelly was not a bad coach, would have flamed out anyway, but giving him the personnel. And then, Peterson wins the Super Bowl. He's had success in Jacksonville, and you can't really knock Sirianni so far. So it was just I was reading an article about the blackouts. It was the 93 opener was one of the blackouts, and about Wes Hopkins coming back the other day against Arizona. Like, Arizona was a terrible team for a lot of years, and so nobody wanted to go see the Eagles without Reggie White and without Keith Jackson and whomever against a bad Cardinals team that Labor Day that Tommy was talking about. But where Reed really went down was, number one, they started not drafting as well, which you'll talk about, and two, all his assistant coaches that were really good were getting hired by other teams, and he wasn't replacing them with guys that were as good.
Reed went downhill. I give you 2 words.
His kids,
Juan
but yes.
Castillo.
Well,
when Juan Castillo was
Yeah.
made the defense coordinator, that was it for him.
That's when he went off the deep end, I think for sure. And he had his problems with his sons, and I think that obviously affected him as a coach too. But, that was really, like I talked about the Phillies being good at the right time. The Eagles, in that first set of Reed's era where they went to those 4 NFC Championship games in a row, they were really the dominant team in the NFC that didn't win a Super Bowl. Like, there was no year after year team that was as good as they were on a consistent basis on the NFC side. So for them,
they took advantage of a bad conference too in that run.
Absolutely.
That run.
So the fact that they were that good and couldn't get one changes the whole narrative around that team, obviously, and how they're looked upon. But, they had a nice 5-year window there where there wasn't a good team year to year except for them, because even the Rams weren't good every year back then, and they just couldn't get over the hump against, and get to this.
Look, Reed's great, but he still has a pretty big flaws, and now Patrick Mahomes just covers them all up. I mean, if you could still look at the Super Bowls they won, Mahomes made particular plays that were just ungodly. That if you don't make, that McNabb didn't make, and that's why they didn't win those games.
Euro 2000, like you can't lose to Tampa Bay in that game. You just can't. You can't lose to Tampa Bay
Carolina?
in that.
Carolina.
Carolina. I mean, McNabb got hurt in a Carolina game. You still can't lose that game
Jake
either.
Delhome's the quarterback. Like, yeah.
Yeah, you can't. You
Yeah,
can't
they
lose
lost.
that
I
game.
mean, they lost to inferior teams during that run.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, in the conference championships. I mean, there wasn't
Mm-hmm.
an inferior team in New England, but it was an inferior team in the conference championships, and that kind of
Except the
defined.
Rams. The Rams were better than
Yeah,
them,
the
but
Rams-
the other
the
games
other-
they
yeah,
They
lost.
weren't ready for where they were at. They were.
And
ahead of
Arizona, they
schedule.
should have won back
Yeah.
in the
Absolutely.
later
They were a better
years.
team than
Heck,
Arizona. So
That was
I mean,
McNabb.
I do think you. I mean, you kind of poo-pooed the fact that like you said it. You know that McNabb didn't come up big in the big situations, but to me, man, he might have been the reason why though. He might have been the reason why they didn't win a Super Bowl in that particular era. I'm not saying, you know, you always have the argument of, well, if you replace McNabb with this quarterback that was playing around this
Well,
time,
you're one
would
of the
they have
ones
won?
that think Randall's better than McNabb. So
What
know
think,
you're one of the
what
ones.
I think is
right?
that what I think. Well, look, I mean, it was a completely different
clean.
era of football.
Come clean.
You said a minute ago, like Randall's the kind of guy, like if he was coming out today, would be phenomenal, right? But they never really used. They didn't have the right coach to use his talents properly. I know that he went to
No,
Minnesota,
he didn't
went
want to
15
play
and 1,
right.
you know, and had a MVP type season once he left the
Oh,
Eagles.
that was
that's a
Bob's
different
way to
quarterback.
Randy Moss.
my noodle
I
arm
understand,
could
but
threw
that's-
for
that's
40
the
touchdowns that year.
That's the talent. That's the talent around them. That you know,
Yeah,
look at
that's
the
also
talent that he
10
had
years-
around them during the time he was here. They
Yeah,
had
but
nobody.
he didn't have legs at that point either.
It's
It
10
was-
years later, and
yeah.
he couldn't move anymore. So
Right.
then he became a quarterback.
Right.
He wouldn't become a. He
But
didn't
why
want to
couldn't
become a
they
quarterback.
make him? Why couldn't
He
they?
didn't
You could say
want
it's all
to.
him. All
he
him.
didn't want to. Ask John Gruden. John Gruden said he would be trying to teach him in practice. He'd be looking and stand. He didn't want to. He wanted to be what he wanted to do.
That's not
He
my
did
argument
want to
anyway.
be
My,
coach.
my argument's not about.
me
My
be.
argument's not
Let
about
me be.
that. My argument's just about if you had a better quarterback during that run, would they have won a Super Bowl? It's not about Cunningham. I'm just talking
Oh, he was a
about.
choke artist, McNabb. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I mean,
but he was better
they
than
might not
Cunningham.
even get to those games without McNabb, too.
Correct.
I mean, you know,
Correct.
there's no
But
question.
he
Big
chose.
dichotomy. He's you know,
I mean,
he's
look-
one of those guys that in Philadelphia sports lore will always have his defenders and everyone that didn't like him.
I don't like the guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think he was a good
I mean,
quarterback. I'm
the
not
the
gonna say he
homer the
wasn't.
homer in me will always say that if T.O. was 100% healthy, they win that Super Bowl because he would have broken at least one of those passes for
Possibly.
a touchdown, and it would have completely changed the trajectory of the game. That's with midnight green
Could be.
colored glasses, but I truly do believe it because he was at like 70% tops, and look at the game he had, and he was the best player McNabb ever played with as far as a receiver. So
Yeah, one thing you said, Chalky, that you know, or you brought up was Chip Kelly, and what's funny is, I mean, you could make the argument that if the Eagles never hired Chip Kelly, they don't even get their Super Bowl in 17
Yeah.
because it was from Kelly's taking over the organization that Lurie put Doug Peterson as the coach to take back the organization to bring the culture of what Philadelphia was back because Kelly was so hated and such an anti-culture guy. So you don't, if, again, it's always going to be that way. But, if he never comes in and does what he does, you might not see that 17 season.
Kelly and Buddy Ryan were similar personalities in that they didn't have the quote-unquote emotional intelligence. Like, they were going to say what they wanted to say, and that was it. So, like, Buddy Ryan, for years, called Norman Bremen that guy in France. And eventually, after not winning the playoffs, Norman Bremen got tired of it and fired him. And Kelly just didn't care if he got the players mad or whatever,
They said that Lurie, the straw was the Christmas party where he didn't show up or whatever it was, and that's when when Lurie was like, "That's enough."
But I mean, so you're right with that. But also, I mean, look at the coaches that were on Kelly's staff that stuck around for Peterson laid the foundation. Stoutland, Phipp, some of those guys hung around, and they were pretty. They were crucial in creating that 2017 championship team.
Yeah, no question about that as well. All right, Jason, you wanted to go through some of their draft picks, right?
Yeah, I think these draft names are always fun. So in '87, Jerome Brown, great pick, right? '88, Keith Jackson, that's another good pick. '89, they didn't have a first round pick. '90, Ben Smith was a great pick. Guy was a great cornerback, and he blew his knee out, was never the same. And then it started to go downhill. 91, you drafted Antone.
Traded up to get him.
Okay. 92, no pick. 93, you had Lester Holmes. Bad. 94, Bernard Williams.
Bernard Williams,
Bad.
that's the one I always
Nah,
remember.
Bernard Williams was good, but he couldn't put the dope down. he
Okay.
was like an all rookie player, but he couldn't stop smoking dope.
95, as Ray Rhodes would say, Mike Mamula. Mamula. Terrible. Terrible.
Combine
Over Warren Sapp.
phenom, right?
Over Warren Sapp. Over Warren Sapp. And you had Jermaine Marbury. Or he was bad, right? He was another guy.
He was a
Not
Pro
good.
Bowler a couple times. Took him a while.
Marbury?
Yeah.
He was okay, I guess.
I mean, he's okay. Yeah,
He's all
Yeah,
right.
Harris. How
That's
about
the guy.
Harris? You
That's
like
the
him?
That's
guy.
the guy,
He was on
yeah, I
like
remember.
nobody's draft board. That was
Yeah. So that was 97. Now, then I drew a line under that because now wait till you hear the names. And then you have Trey Thomas in 98, right? And you have McNabb in 99. Corey Simon in 2000, right? Then it got bad again. Freddie Mitchell,
Instead
Lito.
of Chad
Lito was
Johnson
okay, I
or
guess.
Yeah,
Reggie
Lito.
Wayne or
Yeah.
There-
Jermaine McDougal.
There was
McDougal.
that Reed had
Jerome
like
McDougal,
areas
that was
where
it.
he just had blind spots. So like
Yeah.
receivers and kind of defensive linemen, he had like these blind spots of not being able to draft them for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, then, the 09, you had Macklin. 10 was, Graham. Right? That was a great pick.
Yeah, it
right?
took him a couple years, but
Yeah.
it turned
Yeah.
into a great pick. Now Reed also
Watkins.
had his strength was in later rounds at times too, like the Kelsey.
Yeah,
He- he
I
had
just
some
had the
times
first
So like
round
the year
this
before,
but yeah.
08, they traded out of the first round, got an extra pick. They drafted Jackson in the second round, and then traded one of their first round picks the year they took
Right.
Macklin for Peters. So
But the
Right.
the problem, and I would have to pull up their drafts. There was years though of drafts where none of 2 years later, none of the guys were on their roster.
Oh, yeah, there was just bad.
Where
Yeah.
like teams
Like-
you replenish your roster
They're
with
late
second
90s.
rounders.
05,
you know,
06,
guys
I don't
that-
really think had guys that were.
Who was
I
the
mean,
fireman
weren't on the
they drafted?
roster.
Oh,
I was
Volunteer
Watkins.
firemen.
Danny Watkins.
I was
yeah.
getting to him, Watkins.
That's
But
good.
then after Watkins, then now you're getting to why they won the Super Bowl. Cox. Lane Johnson. Right? Well, Smith was bad. Aguilar was
Ertz
bad.
was that year, right? He was a second
Ertz
round.
was a
Ertz
second
was
rounder
Ertz
in
was
13.
second round. Wentz thing. Now here's I want to reiterate why I didn't like the Wentz move back then, and I turned out to be half right and half wrong, and I'll tell you why. I thought that they had a great roster back then, and I was like, why are you bringing in trading up all this capital to bring in a quarterback from a Division 1A or whatever he was, Division 1A or
Yeah,
1AA, whatever he was, quarterback, to come in and not go with a veteran quarterback at that point with that roster. Now, Wentz developed faster than I thought he did, and that's why, he's one of the reasons why they won the Super Bowl in that year. Now, he turned out to
Yeah.
fall off a cliff
Right.
after that. But I didn't think a quarterback like that from a Division 1A school would be able to come in and develop that quickly to quarterback a team like that I thought was ready to win, and obviously they were. They won. I thought they had a great roster. I didn't think he was ready, but he was.
Yeah, and he was
Um,
a huge part of the reason why they won that Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Now that being said, I don't know if they win the Super Bowl if he stays healthy because Foles played out of his mind.
Yeah, it's hard to say. You can't.
I
Foles played it.
don't
he
know
had
if they.
He had 2-game run where he was the best
He was
quarterback.
out of his
I definitely don't think they win if Foles plays the whole year as a starter, and I think you can certainly
No.
argue that there's almost no way Wentz could have played better than Foles did in the championship game and Super Bowl. So I think,
Right.
it split at almost the perfect time, really.
Right. Yeah, it was.
You got your,
almost lightning in a
Foles
bottle.
could have those 3-4 really great games in a row, and you got 2 of them in the playoffs, and
The only thing is Wentz didn't have bad games either, though. So you can argue
that year he
Wentz
really
could've
really
made those-
didn't, but
made all those game plays too.
Yeah.
He did, but you don't know. The Super Bowl that Foles had was legendary. Like you don't-
Right,
you don't
right.
know
But
if-
Wentz, like I said, Wentz had games like that for
Yeah.
all season. That he was making plays like that. So it's hard to say.
Yeah.
But Foles was
once-
phenomenal.
It's never happened.
Yeah.
It's never happened in the history of the NFL where a that situation with Foles. It's just never
Doug
happened.
Williams.
Well,
Doug Williams.
Was it Hostetler?
Jeff Hostetler.
Yeah.
But
no,
Jeff
but
Hostetler.
not like that. Not
I mean,
where
Hos-
that was the reason
Hostetler
why they
didn't-
won
yeah.
the Super Bowl. Like the game that he had and the circumstance.
Well, Doug Williams
behind it.
won the
Doug
MVP.
Williams had a great game, yeah. Well, Timmy Smith had,
But
like,
he
600
played a
yards
good
rushing,
portion
but-
of the season, though, before the Super Bowl. Doug Williams.
Yeah.
I mean, Foles played what? Like, not even a couple
four
He
games,
started,
right?
he,
Wasn't
started,
it four?
he
Yeah.
started the last 3 and then the playoffs.
Came in,
Yeah, I mean, it's
in halfway in the Rams.
Came in the
and
Rams,
the
started
yeah.
circumstances
right,
beyond belief, that happened. But you
Yeah, that
say
was
they
Doug-
shouldn't have
but that was-
drafted Wentz.
That was Doug Peterson, who changed the offense during the
Yeah.
playoff bye week.
Yeah.
Oh,
to the
yeah.
RPO
And,
offense based
was it
on
Laser? Was it
based
quarterback?
on what Chip Kelly did
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
When Foles was under Chip Kelly. So
Yeah.
again, Kelly comes in.
Where were they drafting before they traded up to 2?
Well, they traded to like 7, right? And then they traded to 2. Well, didn't they have to make a trade
They made,
to get
yes.
into the
So
top 10 first?
they traded whatever plus Kiko Alonso to Miami to get to like 8. So I want to say they were like 12 or 13 maybe.
Yeah.
They got up to 8.
Okay.
And then they
Yeah.
traded up with, they made another move that sent Murray out. And then they used that stuff plus 8 plus the future first to go to Cleveland to go up to 2.
So they
I'm just
used
kinda
all
looking at
they
the
used
guys
all,
that they
Chip
would've-
Kelly's guys.
Yeah, because I think they were
Right.
7-9 that last year. I think that Kelly got fired before the last game, so they were like almost a 500 team. So they were picking in the middle of the first round. They weren't going
Yeah.
to get a quarterback.
Mhm.
And he tried to give away the whole team for Mariota. They wanted to trade Fletcher
Yeah.
Cox, trade some of these guys, and Tennessee just didn't want any part of it. I guess luckily,
Right.
But yeah, that was just.
We
I
got
mean,
Mariota now,
yeah,
though.
finally, 20 years,
Got him
20
out.
years later. But I mean, like
No,
that.
before the draft, I had a Mariota T-shirt made.
I
with number 9 on
remember that.
it. So now I can wear
Yeah,
it.
but I mean, it's like, well, he's not 9 now, I guess, though. Like,
No,
what
he's not.
numbers? No, I don't think they're ever
I think
letting
that was-
anybody wear 9 again.
Oh, Foles
was
was
it Foles?
9, right?
But I mean, like, Foles is obviously the big story of that. But I mean, like, that was like the not quite the '93 Phillies team, but like that was a storybook team. The quarterback went down. You lost your Hall of Fame left tackle. You lost your starting middle
it was almost
linebacker.
lightning
Your
in a bottle.
starting
Oh,
running
yeah.
back. Like all the guys that ended up getting hurt and they still came on and won.
Yeah.
And they
I
didn't.
mean, I was the biggest component of that. They had no chance to win a Super Bowl
Yeah.
when Wentz got down, when Peters was hurt. Like, I mean, I'll be the first.
No,
to
I
tell
mean
you,
we saw
no
Peter.
chance.
We saw Peters and Hicks get hurt in the same game. Like we were there the Monday night when he went down. It was like all right, and then like Wentz gets hurt, and you're like, well, maybe it's not for the whole year. And then he went, and I'm like, well, and I'm like, well, hey, Nicky Six did before 27-2, and it turned out.
And those seasons that are unexpected also have a little more fun to them than like the Eagles last year. Not that they were expected to win the Super Bowl; they were expected to be a good team. That was like one of the most boringest regular seasons of football for a team that I could like. You hadn't hit. Well, the Phillies had to run, which took a big chunk of it out, but. There was it was just a boring regular season that the Eagles were playing the whole, it was just like get to the playoffs. Where 17 was, and it culminated in me getting to go to the Super Bowl to watch.
And
that game.
17, like people were like, oh, the team should be better, but nobody was really thinking of them as a true. They were a borderline playoff contender at best, let alone
like
Super Bowl
Jason
contender.
said, Wentz wasn't projected to be that Wentz. He wasn't an
No,
MVP.
he made the
candidate
huge step
going
forward
into
in
the
year
season.
2, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think happened
Happened to
to
what?
Wentz?
I think part of it was he got hurt, but I also think part of it's mental.
Yeah, I think
a lot better.
I think the Foles stuff really affected him. Him
Yeah.
getting hurt.
It
That's
not
what.
being-
It's so funny you say that because I say that all the time. I think that it killed him. Like he didn't play in that game.
It did.
And then it wasn't confidence per se because it was like, okay, well this guy took over and won the Super Bowl and then come out the next year and have kind of a so year the next year.
He wasn't healthy either.
And I don't
then
just think
he
it wasn't
broke
the
his back
same.
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the year he got hurt.
I mean, you think about
And then he lost-
2019. He was completely healthy until he got the concussion in the playoff game, and he set the Eagles' passing record for yards in the year with fourth string receivers because even they brought Jackson back, he gets hurt, Jeffrey hurt, Aguilar's dropping passes again. Everybody's catching but Aguilar, and But then we find out years later that I think it was what Sproles said before Super Bowl, like he almost fist fought Wentz in the locker room that offseason because they were with the guys that were hurt, and Wentz was not like acting happy for the team at times because he wasn't the quarterback. So that whole like I'm not the guy doing it, there was a resentment towards Foles, and ultimately Foles had more of the team behind him for the time he was here.
And the fans didn't make it easy for him either.
I
mean, that's a lot to
but
live up
I don't
to.
think the fans got look. I was there the opening day when Foles had gotten traded or Foles had left and Wentz was back as a starter. He got the loudest ovation. I think the fans were on board with Wentz, especially after the way Foles crapped out in the New Orleans game the year in the playoffs the year before. But like that last year, that 2020, when he was really struggling, yeah, they got on him and he wasn't ready to deal with that. And look at his progression in the league from now. Like as soon as he's hit a struggle, like he just drops off. Like he might start a year well or whatever, but he can't overcome adversity like nowadays. And I think it's just injuries adding up plus something mentally
And he lost a step.
Yeah, and he lost a step with
he lost
the
a step
injuries.
when he blew his knee out.
Yeah, I
He
mean,
was running around a lot
in
before he got
17,
hurt.
some of the plays he made were with his leg. Like,
With
even
his
in
legs,
the
legs,
pocket,
yeah.
his ability to move in the pocket was.
Yeah.
And then you watch him, I mean, last year, he was, when the Eagles beat him against Washington, he couldn't move at all.
No.
He's like,
No.
I mean.
It was crazy. That 2020 season, I think, because Tom and I were texting during the game, obviously, they jump out really. It was like 17-0, and we're like, they're going back to the Super Bowl. They score like the first 3 drives. Wentz looks unstoppable. He throws a bad interception, and then after that, it was just like, boom, everything fell apart. And it wasn't even like, that was a great defensive play. It was like, what were you thinking, like, making that kind of throw? And I think at some point, he just lost, if he ever had it, the ability to, like, okay, made a mistake, let's get over it, and let's get through it.
Yeah.
He just hasn't shown that ability.
He was a culmination.
Yeah.
He wasn't liked by players. He had physical limitations, and he had mental limitations.
I never liked his release. Ever. I always thought he had a slow
It was slow and
release.
long, yeah.
And long. Just like Randall, actually. But, I don't know. I mean, I just think...
was so tentative, though. Like a guy's open, you have to make that throw right then and there, and he was like overthink it. As he got worse in his career, it was all
and he
up here.
He didn't give up on plays that would hurt him.
He tried to play hero ball too much.
One thing you watch what
you
Hurts
make
is
the bad decisions.
Hurts will be one of the first guys to throw the ball away and go to the next play, and Wentz never did that, and he got away with it a lot in 17 because he was able. Even at Seattle, if you remember, he's like falling to the ground and he makes it. A 40-yard.
Yeah.
Well, once all the physical limitations went, those plays no longer work for him. It's like it's like playing softball, well after your baseball career for us, and those balls in the hole that you used to get to when you're 12 and 16, you ain't getting them no more.
I mean, what was that play he made? I mean, the first drive of the year, he kept some play alive against Washington, threw up there, and Aguilar gets a touchdown. And then there was the Monday night game where like 11 guys were on his back, and somehow he squirts out and runs for the first down, and everybody's like, how did he do that? And it's like that all went right for him in 17, and then as he tried to do that as the years progressed and the injuries added up, he wasn't able to make those plays anymore. And
the reason why he wasn't giving up on plays was because he wasn't making the right throw at the right time. So he extended the play because the play that he was supposed to make he didn't make.
Yeah, some of the stuff though is weird. Like he was able to read a defense in that year, and now it's like that's one of the things he can't do is read a defense.
Yeah.
And it's I think a lot of it is actually
It's extremely.
he's got a lot of yips, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
Yeah. But, I guess one thing I wanted to read, and I should have did it in the beginning. So we went over like the Final Fours and the finals. So the Phillies have 5 Final Fours in these 40 years: 93, 2008, 2009, 2010, and then 2022. And they had 4 finals: 93, 08, 09, and 22, and then the one championship, obviously in 08. Eagles had 7 Final Fours: 01, 02, 03, 04, 08, 17, 22. 3 Super Bowls: 04, 17, 22, and then obviously the one Super Bowl in 17. So, those 2 organizations probably, if you had to rank them, and it's tough. I mean, the Phillies had, even having that stretch of bleakness, like the Phillies had 5 Final Fours. That's 1 out of every 8 years. If you do the math, that's not bad, right? You know, they have 4 finals. That's 1 out of every 10 years. That's not bad. Four World Series. You know, you have to, like Tommy said, if they would have won the '09 World Series, I think they would have been a lock to be the #1 organization.
Yeah,
in the
and
city.
we said it earlier. Baseball, like football, you can have a mediocre season and still make it to the playoffs,
Right.
and maybe win a game and lose in the second round. And now that
Yeah.
season doesn't seem as bad. Where baseball, you missed the playoffs, and now you're like, well, that season was a waste. So it's
Yeah.
hard. You know, that does make it a little tough.
Yeah.
Well, you look at the National League. I mean, baseball. There's been a lot of different teams that make World Series in the National League. I mean, the Yankees dominated for a while there in the American League. Boston dominated for a while there in American League. Toronto had their little run, but when you look at if you're comparing the Phillies against other National League teams over the last 25 to 40 years, they're probably, they're probably top 5 organizations
Yeah,
definitely.
National League.
And
Atlanta,
that's with that stretch.
St. Louis.
Imagine if they
the
didn't have that
Dodgers.
horrible stretch.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks.
Atlanta, St. Louis, the Dodgers are about the 3 teams I can name off the top of my head that are probably better organization. Now the Marlins did win 2 World Series
Well,
during this time, but they haven't been a better organization over the whole long run.
so that's a question I was going to ask earlier. If we had time, I'll pose it now. So obviously, championships mean the most of anything we're talking about here. But as far as being a fan or whatever, this is the 30th year or 31st season for the Marlins. They've made the playoffs 3 times. Once was the COVID shortened year. Throw that out. So the 2 times they've made it in a full season, they didn't win the division ever in 30 years, but they won 2 World Series. The Phillies over that time won everything that Jason said, but only won 1 World Series. Would you rather have been a Marlins fan with a lot of bad but 2 championships, or a Phillies fan that went that many times but only won once? How much weight does that
Phillies.
extra championship carry,
For
considering how bad the Marlins were?
Yeah.
No.
The Phillies.
Yeah.
Look,
Yeah,
you want to
certainly
go
Phillies.
into every season with a legitimate chance to make a run at a title. They're not, only one team wins a title every year. But if you can go into every season or, 80% of a decade, 8 out of 10 seasons, with a legitimate chance to win a title. I mean, like the Sixers, look, the Sixers haven't gotten out of the second round, but every year they go in with
Yeah.
a legitimate
Yeah.
chance to win a title.
And I
As a fan, I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
And
I think that's what
I mean,
gives the Eagles the edge if we're comparing the 4 teams, because there's been more years where even if they underachieve, the Eagles have been considered to have a decent team with a shot. Like they had some bad years, but there were. I mean, just thinking and doing a quick research, I feel there was a lot more years where we would go in saying the Phillies are just going to be absolutely awful this year, and it's going to be 6 long months. And even some years when we were like, oh, the Eagles probably aren't going to be that good, like maybe Kelly's first year and Ray Rhodes' first year, and even Sirianni's
Reed's
first
first
year.
year.
They went to the playoffs and won a playoff game.
The other thing with that though, where sports are different, football, you could be bad to okay a season, and then the next year you could turn it around.
Yeah.
Baseball, if you don't have
It's tough.
Right.
talent and you don't have
It's
young
tough.
talent, it's not like miraculously the next year you're going to get all those players.
Well, that's why the '93 team was that's that miracle team,
It
because you don't
takes
see teams
time.
do that.
No, because where did that, again, it's the young up and coming talent
Yeah.
that usually gets you, and then you plug in the free agents. So, that's where comparing the sports makes it a little tough.
I don't remember what year it was. Maybe Jason remembers, because you get Sports Illustrated, right?
Oh, I used to.
All right. Well, were you getting Sports Illustrated at the time that Sports Illustrated the year the Houston Astros? They were like
Yeah,
the
they
worst
were on
team
the
in
cover.
baseball.
Yeah, and they predicted them to win the World Series in a certain year.
Which
like
they
5 years later.
which
or
they
something.
did.
Yeah.
And it was all because they knew what was in their farm system and everything that they have done.
Who were there? They swung and missed on 2 first overall picks. So even getting the first overall pick doesn't always guarantee the winner,
This
because
is
Yeah.
pre
But it's the whole-
Bregman.
this is
It's the whole.
it's like
It's the
12
whole.
and 13. They drafted. Was the kid they traded to the Phillies for the closer. I'm drawing a blank on his name now. He was out of baseball and then he came back.
Michael
Oh,
Bourne?
I know who you're
No,
talking about. I can't remember his name either.
I was gonna say Apple, but he's the kid that's there now.
Oh. Yeah, it was that.
Yeah, Apple. Abel's the kid they have now. It was Pell. or
the
whatever.
one that
Yeah.
played and they got
Mark
Yeah.
Appel. Mark
Appel.
Appel.
Yeah.
And then
All right.
the next guy, he didn't turn into the year after that, they took another guy first who wasn't like a star or like a really contribute on any of their championship teams, but they drafted.
And that's the whole
those
process
other guys,
argument.
obviously, yeah.
The whole process argument.
Well,
You're not going to hit on every one of them,
draft
but
is
if you have
the draft is
5 of
always
them,
going to be
you might hit
Yeah.
on 2 of them.
right.
And baseball's trickier
The
too
draft
because
is
you
never-
It's not all about draft though. It's all about scouting.
it's
those
scouting, and then
Latino
it's like,
players
can
and
we
so
can we
forth.
take a guy in the 10th round and maybe convince him to sign instead of going to college, which is not really as much of a thing with some of the other leagues where like Utley was
Yeah.
drafted by the Dodgers in whatever round, didn't sign,
Yeah, he
and then
went
the
to
Phillies
school.
got another
Yeah.
shot at him. But some of these guys
You know
that
who-
they could draft in the 10th
I mean,
round,
Carlos
if you
Carlos
convince them.
Ruiz, they signed at like 14 years old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You know, so it's. I mean, really, you know, when you get those Latin American guys too, you can lock them in at a young.
You know who the current day Astros are? Baltimore Orioles. Because they call up like a stud prospect like once a
Yeah,
week now.
they fall into that category though. Like they don't want to spend, so
yeah,
if they don't
but I
win
think,
with the young guys, they're going to get rid of
Yeah.
them, and you know,
Yeah.
so that's where they struggle.
I think you're gonna have an Orioles World Series maybe in the next 3 or 4 years. I think
or
they
Orioles
got a
Reds
lot
World
of young
Series.
players. Orioles could be Reds. Yeah, I mean
Tampa too.
They're another
like,
team.
Tampa had their lean years like
Well,
after.
that's a team that doesn't
Yeah.
spend.
Yeah,
They
That's
they
a
don't
team
spend.
that's-
They
don't
draft,
spend, but
They need a new stadium or
you know,
relocation,
they know how-
and then maybe they'll
they
spend.
draft, but and they also take
They know how to
they can
draft.
take mediocre players and somehow make them into ball players as well. But they're a team. Yeah, once their contract comes due, they're gone.
They let 'em
They're
go. They
gone.
trade
They-
them.
You know, the Athletics were like obviously Moneyball. That was the whole Moneyball team.
Well, what
you
I
know.
fear about like this, the Phillies don't become like a team that's all that they're about doing is spending the money just to replace another guy. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, the problem,
and then
that's the
sign him to
problem
a
with
bad
Dombrowski.
contract, and he's
Well,
Dombrowski is a win now guy.
Dombrowski-
38
what I'm
years
saying.
old, and you're still paying him $35 million. You know,
Dombrowski's
so,
a one night stand. Like he's gonna take a trip to Vegas, give you 3 solid days, and then he's out. You know, and
You're
that's
gonna-
what
yeah,
he's
you're
gonna
gonna
do.
have-
He's gonna give you a couple years, ruin your
Yeah.
franchise.
Yeah,
but
I
he's
would
gonna
say
win
most of
you a
these guys we're
World
talking about
Series.
earlier
Or
aren't
you'll win
ever
a
going to
World
make it to the
Series.
Phillies because they'll be traded for something in the next
But
couple
he's gonna
years.
win you a
But
World
you could-
Series.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's
You know,
their window. You know, while Harper is still fairly young, while Trey Turner is still fairly
It's
young,
now.
or Castellanos is not on the wrong side of 30, so to speak. He's whatever, 31, 32,
Yeah,
but
you
he's
got to
still a
go
good
for
player.
it now.
This is it. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
this
right.
is like
I mean, look at you. We're talking about the Phillies. You know, over 40, and we won't go 40 years. But the Yankees, it's been what since '09, right?
Yeah.
Against the Phillies that they won the one,
Yep.
and that's a team that exactly like we're saying that every year they're replacing with buying players. You know, they got talent
I mean,
coming up,
they had that.
and they haven't won in 15 years.
They had that. You know,
And they shouldn't even won that.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, and that was
They would have
right,
been
and that was-
23
They
years.
had
it
that
would've
stretch
been.
from
No.
96 to whatever 2000 they won 4 out of 5 and they won a couple, but they've been to the
Right.
World Series twice in the last 20 years.
Yeah,
or once
it's-
really, I guess
it's
twice
sport.
seasons.
but their core players,
And
their
one
core
once.
Sports is
players were
also
not guys
different.
they spent money on in those years too. You know,
Yes.
between
Sports is
Bernie
different
Williams and
today.
Jeter and Mariano, they were the core players of that team. Just like Utley, Howard, and Rollins, and Hamels.
Yeah.
It's all about that. It's all about the guys that you bring up in through your farm system.
They were
It's not
able.
about
They
the
were
guys
able
you
to
spend the money
effectively
on.
mix the players. So they had those guys you mentioned, and they were okay. They brought in David Wells. They got tired of him, so they traded
Gutierrez.
him for
good pieces.
Roger Clemens, Mike Messina, Scott Brocious,
David
all
Cohn.
guys that
Yeah.
contributed that came from other teams and made a difference. Knobloch, you know, he was on those early 2000 teams, right? So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, boys. Anything else before we say goodnight?
I have one
No, I like-
question, I guess. I think we've kind of answered it, but if you had to pick one team, 1 year, 1 season of any of the teams that didn't win the championship, which one would you guys pick? I mean, I think I know, but I'm just...
Yeah, it's 93 Phillies,
93.
of course.
I'm 87
87
Flyers.
Flyers.
I mean, that
Right, yeah.
team was.
See,
You
that's
guys were too
I'm
young.
5 years
You
old.
guys were
Yeah,
too-
I'm 5 years old in '87.
You guys
so.
would have loved that team because there was. I mean.
I
there
mean,
was
I'll
just
tell you what.
excitement every night.
That was a 2010 Flyers team. I guess was a fun. That was a fun team.
Yeah.
You know,
I
a
gotta
fun
tell you.
year,
It was fun, but
a
it
fun
was
team.
wasn't even close.
I want to agree with Tommy with 93 Phillies, but the 01 Sixers. If the 01 Sixers would have won the championship that
Yeah, that
year,
was a fun
Yeah,
team.
that's a good one.
that would have been the culmination of, I mean, the Iverson era, because I love Iverson, but I just think, I went to every single playoff game. The Phillies, I was at Penn State, so I wasn't able to really go to any of the games, but in '01, I went to every single playoff game, and and Chalky alluded to it when we were doing the Sixers, like it was never hopping like that
Phillies
ever
won.
again in that place. It was unreal, and just the atmosphere to culminate with the championship, which I know they were overmatched against the Lakers, but that would have been mine.
They're up there
choice.
for my
Yeah.
probably my second. They'd be in the conversation for my second favorite team, include '93 Phillies being number one, like we were saying. So I mean, I think it's funny we kind of talked about it, but there are so many of those teams that didn't get there that if they get that championship, the whole narrative around a team changes. If the '97 Flyers win, whatever happens after that, or if the 2014 gets past Tampa and wins, like that whole narrative changes. If Reed's teams win one Super Bowl, that whole narrative changes. If the Phillies get another one, they're a dynasty for that matter.
The reverse could be said too. If the 2017 Eagles don't win,
Yeah, then that's
I mean, at least I'm saying the '04 Eagles is the season that I would want as the team to win the championship. Championships do help, ease the pain.
Yeah.
It eased the pain of the 2022 Eagles not winning.
I would have been absolutely so much more miserable if they hadn't won in 17
Yeah,
and lost the 20,
right, so-
the 2022 Super Bowl like that. All right, so I would say '93 Phillies. I think would be number one. My number two, I'm not going to mention because that goes to my next question. Which is the most heartbreaking team to not win? Or the biggest disappointment?
93
The
Phillies.
biggest disappointment when the team didn't win. What was the biggest disappointment?
I gotta say the
I'll tell you-
'93 Phillies, because when the way they lost, just the Carter home run it's in my head forever. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it was
would
Game
think, too.
6, but
I would say, I mean, maybe the '87 Flyers again. I wasn't but like
Well,
Meeker
yeah.
said with the Sixers in '01, you went into that saying the
Yeah.
Sixers have no shot to win this championship. So that kind of, I mean, the '04 Eagles, of course, that was losing by 3 and the first Super Bowl.
See, the way I take the question is like a team that was expected to just win.
And that
Like,
was the 11. That was the 2011
for me-
Phillies.
Well, for me, it's the '97 Flyers. Like, they were better than the Red Wings.
Yeah,
They
the
were.
only reason that
That
it's
was over
like
fast.
hard to say, hard to take is they got swept.
Yeah.
They got swept. It was.
It's not
but
like
they
it went
were-
to 6
They
or
were
They were never
favored.
really.
They were
never
favored.
like by
Like to me,
Game 3, you knew
them-
they were not
when
the
they're
same.
up-
They were not as good, or they were
when
not
they're up
as good.
3-1 against the Devils and lose that
That
series.
that was so
It's
tough.
worse.
And then you had Lindros get hurt in the
Yeah.
last game. Like
Right, that's
hard off.
worse. Yeah,
That's when I threw whatever I was drinking. I slammed it
Yeah.
down and it went all over the
I mean,
section.
that team would be in the conversation of teams
when Bobby
that
Holik
didn't,
scored, with like 2 minutes left.
that didn't win. That I would have liked to see win. Disappointment. All right, so my pick is not one that got mentioned. It's 2002 Eagles. They were coming off of the championship loss, close loss to the Rams. It was the last season of the vet. You had Tampa Bay in 20
Tampa
degree
Bay.
weather.
yeah.
Brian Mitchell almost runs the kickoff back, and then
Yeah,
Deuce
that's
Staley
true.
punches it in. Like, that was supposed to be the team that won. You were supposed to close the vet out with
Yeah.
with the NFC Championship game win, and then you were supposed to go on to the Super Bowl on the team on the rise and go beat Oakland. And
I'm the Grim
that-
Reaper. I was at that game too.
I was at that.
that is
weird.
that would
So that was a game. We went to Kinko's, got a real ticket.
oh, so,
went
yeah,
to
it's a great story.
Kinko's, made tickets because that was back in the day when they were ripped.
That was the vet. Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
made about 100 fake tickets, perforated them with a razor blade, the whole thing. So and then we sold them. So we all go. I mean, we go, and the one guy who got nabbed, who they said the ticket's counterfeit, was the guy whose actual ticket it was. But
Wow.
somehow in the shuffle he lost it. He
He
got
didn't
a
get
fake
it,
ticket.
yeah.
So he slid the guy $50. And he left.
Oh,
It was
see,
the
I,
bet.
I was.
So
In,
we're in the 700 level, and
Yeah.
what did they hold? 25 people, 23 people. There were 65 people in our
Yeah,
row,
but
and it was standing room only in the row because everybody had the same ticket, and it was
I
all
was-
our friends. Oh yeah, and then
I was in Middleton seats for that game. Phillies owner.
oh wow.
Was it?
It was his seats. He gave them to a guy that worked for his cigar company, and then his cousin Dong our friend, he gave him to Don, and
Wow,
Don
that's
took me to the
pretty- yeah,
game.
that's
I was
pretty-
in Middleton seats.
That's
for
pretty
that game.
wild.
That's
Oh, we had phenomenal
I-
seats.
Yeah,
They were
we were at the,
unbelievable.
so I saw that loss. Oh, we were at the in Arizona for when the Eagles lost in Arizona championship game.
yeah.
Yeah, you guys
we
went
were
to
saw
Arizona.
that one. The Flyers won that game. The
Yes,
Chicago game
yes.
that we're at in the Cup.
Overtime, yeah. But
Oh, I was at that Cup game too.
The
Patrick King
overtime game,
I'm
right?
I'm the Grim
You are the
Reaper
Grim- you
of
are the
Philadelphia.
Grim
Oh, you
Reaper,
were-
yeah.
I was at the Patrick King
They-
game. Yes.
I was at the
I was
Ryan
at the
Howard.
Lindros game. When
and
Lindros got knocked out by Stevens, I was at that game.
Now we went. I
Ryan
was
Howard
at the,
Achilles game. I was there for that one.
I was
wasn't
at the
that one.
Berube game when they scored.
Yes.
When Berube scored.
Tommy and
the
I were at
3-1.
that game a row apart and didn't know each other yet.
Didn't know each other. And
Get out,
Jimmy
really?
was in the seat in front of me.
I knew our mutual friend from LaSalle. I ran into him, and then years later found out that Tommy was with the group he was with.
And that was, if you remember, if you ever went to the Meadowlands, they had that tunnel
Yeah.
that you had to walk through, and it was just like World War III. There was bottles getting
Yeah.
thrown.
Yeah.
And Flyers fans are cheering.
I mean,
oh, that
we
Yeah, I went to
We
Flyers.
we stopped.
for those games.
I was with my dad and my sister that night. We stopped on the Jersey Turnpike on the way home at the rest stop, and the rest stop was just overflowed with Flyer. Like we're up 3-1. They're going to the Cup, and it's like But I was never so sure of an outcome as the Eagles winning that NFC Championship game, and ever since then, my nature as a Philadelphia sports fan to never believe anything is a sure thing has been set from that day. And Rondé
that was a
Barber
pretty
running
big
down the
disappointment.
sidelines after picking off McNabb, and
yeah, that
Well,
was.
Sure,
the funny
vicious.
story with that was, if you guys remember, where you were at the game, I'm sure you remember, they were making a little comeback.
yeah,
there. Like they were moving down the field.
they had a
And
chance
I
to
was
cut to a
slumped
one-score
I was-
game if they would have
So-
scored there.
So I was slumped down in my seat because I was like, they're not winning, right? And then all of a sudden, they started moving the ball. So as soon as I get up, like the play that I get up was Rondé
Yeah.
Barber. That was the play that I stood up, like, because I was literally slumped down, not watching it, and then I start seeing action.
I mean,
I'm the Grim Reaper of Philadelphia sports.
but again, I alluded to it. I was at the 17 Super Bowl in Minnesota, so I mean,
Yeah.
I can't really complain about being the games that they lost when I have that one in my
ended up
pocket.
with that. And the Meadowlands,
Yeah.
we didn't talk college, but the Meadowlands was one of the most disappointing scenarios. I was at the game that St. Joe's lost to Oklahoma State in the Elite
Did you
Eight.
go
I
to
did.
that game? I almost.
I went to the
that
Sweet
game.
16 game. They beat.
Where was that at?
That was in the Meadowlands.
That was
They
Meadowlands.
beat Chris Paul
Yeah.
and Wake Forest in the Sweet 16.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
Pat Carroll hit the three to go up with like 20 seconds left, and then John Lucas Jr. I think hits the three to put Ohio State.
John-
or
But then Pat Carroll
Oklahoma
also
State back
fumbled
up.
the
Oklahoma State,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Didn't Pat Carroll fumble like the last play? or something? I
No,
remember,
Nelson
like,
took it down and got a shot off, but he didn't make it.
I thought Pat Carroll
He might have fouled up the switch on defense or something. But when they got the ball, like Nelson got the ball down the court and got a last.
It might have been Carroll.
Yeah, he got a last shot up, and it was.
Yeah, I remember Carroll did something. that
It
I
was
was
like we were in a section full of St. Joe's fans, and there were these two people next to me the whole game who weren't really cheering for me, the team. And then when Oklahoma State won, they started cheering and like ran away right away because they didn't want to cheer the whole game, and but.
those tough St. Joe's.
I guess I don't know, but
The Jesuits.
Villanova
Yeah.
made it all better for us Philadelphia sports basketball fans.
Well,
years afterwards, but
for some.
Well, I got to see the Phillies win the World Series in the stadium.
Yeah, that was cool.
you were at both
Best-
halves of the game, or did you only go to the one half?
No, so the
No.
story is really a good one. So, we went down to the game. 2 days had passed, and we went down to the game hoping that we would score a ticket. Me and my father. Me and my father and my friend Greg. So my father earlier in the day, when I'm down there still trying to score a ticket, he calls me and says, "Hey Chris, I got an opportunity to get a ticket from a guy at work, and I think I'm going to take it, but he only has one." So I said, "Great, get your ticket. I'll try and get a ticket, and then somehow we'll figure out how to meet with each other." So he has his ticket, and then there, looking all over the place, 400, 500, everyone wants $1 billion for these tickets, and I'm getting a little frustrated. I don't want to spend $400 or $500, so I tell my dad, "Look, why don't you just go in and You know, if I get in, I'll call you. If not, then whatever. I'll watch it down the street or whatever we're gonna do. And it was getting late. You know, the game was about to start. So I'm about to leave. I'm about to give up. This guy comes pulling up. He sees me like kind of like with my dad. We're just kind of sitting around, and he walks up to me and he says, "Hey, kid." Not kid, but you know, he was older. And he says, "You looking for a ticket?" And I said, "Yeah, I just need one ticket though." And he goes, "Well, listen, my buddy couldn't make it. I'll give it to you for face value." So he gives it to me for $150. Peel off 150. I'm in the game. Now I'm sitting in a section that's way beyond where my dad's sitting, right? So my dad goes to the seat. I go to the seat. Who is it? Jenkins hits the double, right?
To start it off.
And the crowd's going crazy. And my dad's calling my cell phone. Now I'm thinking he's just calling to say, you know, whatever was going on. He says, "Hey, Chris, I'm sitting next to a guy that I actually know who would be willing to go and take your seat and let you sit next to me." Right? So in between where the seventh inning is where it started, in between the seventh, the top of the bottom of the seventh, and the beginning of the eighth, or whatever, sixth or seventh, whenever they started the game again, the guy says he's going to come. He wants to meet you at your section. Just stay outside your section. Tell me what section. I'm screaming because the crowd is just out of control, loud, and my dad can't hear me. And I'm like, just give the phone to the other guy. So I tell the guy where I'm sitting, and I say, "I'll meet you outside my section." So in between the innings, he comes, gives me a ticket. I give him my ticket. I go sit with my dad, and I get to watch the rest of the World Series with my dad, which was probably the most awesome moment of my life. And I couldn't even watch. I couldn't watch the last out. I couldn't watch the at bat with Hinsky. I couldn't watch Lidge. I was just, my heart was just beating out of my chest. And I said, "Dad, just tell me what happens. I got to sit down." So I'm sitting down, and my dad's like, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I just can't do it. I can't stand it." Right? So I'm sitting down, and all of a sudden, I see everyone jump up and down. I know what happened. I didn't actually see the strikeout, you know, and then I just saw everyone start piling on Ruiz. And me and my dad and everyone around us are just going crazy, high-fiving. Just a great moment. Like, and I didn't think I would ever be able to get into the game, let alone sit with my dad.
Yeah,
You know, it was
that's
just
awesome.
unbelievable.
That's better.
Got the ticket in a frame with a picture of me and my dad with the pile on the background.
That's better than
That's
Tommy's ticket story from that game. Do you remember that, Tom? I got to tell his story. So Tommy and I watched.
It's literally going to be the first time I heard
I
this
think there's
story,
videos.
even though I guess
There's-
apparently
you
I
lived
read
it.
it.
story that
lived
you
it.
don't even know about?
I think there's videos somewhere. So Tommy and I watched. We go out for first part of Game 5 at the now departed Downey's at Front and South, and it gets okay, they go, and at that point, as a Philadelphia sports fan, I'm like, this is it. Like, we were supposed to win tonight, and now it's not going to happen. So all right, so Wednesday, so Tommy's neighbor, our friend, and his buddy had tickets to the Game 5. So they decide Tommy's neighbor coordinates with his brother to play a joke on Tommy. So his brother calls Tommy and says, "Yo, our neighbor was trying to get a hold of you. He couldn't get a hold of you, so he asked me if I wanted to go with him to the game tonight because his buddy can't go. So I'm going with him." And I get a heads up when this is going to happen because he calls me. So he's like, "Oh, Tommy's really mad." So I think he filmed that, like, Tommy came in the front door and was like, literally, started throwing blows. Like, he's like, he's like, "You don't deserve to go," and he was like, and it was like a complete joke because he wasn't going at all. But he got so mad that he was going to take his brother instead of him to the game. He's like, "You don't even want you," because he missed like all of Game 4 because he was out visiting his girlfriend. We couldn't get a hold of him for 5 hours out in Lancaster or something. He's like, "You didn't even watch the last game," and it was like a joke the whole time or whatever. But yeah.
I honest to God don't remember it. I believe.
Yeah, I've never. I don't know if I heard it on the phone as it happened. I saw the video later. Like, I don't know. I've rarely seen him that angry ever. Like,
It's just to end the show. It is funny though that in my lifetime, I guess you guys early on the championships, 82. You guys are 80, but the two championships that we get, 08 and 17. 08 is broken up, right? And you play half the game by rain, and then so the Phillies win, and like that never has happened before. But and then the 17 Eagles with, the starting quarterback getting hurt, and the true like superhero Foles comes in, and not only wins the Super Bowl, but outduels the greatest, arguably the greatest quarterback of all time, to beat the evil empire of a team that beat them in the Super Bowl to get their first Super Bowl. It's like only Philadelphia
Yeah.
way to kind of win those championships.
And we were talking about earlier about the teams that didn't win. If they win that 0-4 game and they play again and win, or whatever in 17, that's not the same story because it's the rematch 13 years later against the greatest dynasty in Super Bowl era history, and you win that game as opposed to the first one.
Yeah. All right. Let's say goodnight to the folks. Like I said, next week we will have the All-Star break. Baseball, we'll kind of take a look, and we'll kick off our Saratoga Pick 4 handicapping that will bring you every week. Hopefully, we'll have some guests for that that you're probably familiar with. But we will be back with baseball and horses next week. Nobody else has anything else? Good night.